Well, we're back. Yes, my friends, fans, and foes, we're back with another season of muppetcember, a yearly Muppet-themed video series that goes over any number of the media left behind or currently being made by the Jim Henson Company. Anything could be on the table the more I do this, and so far I found myself enjoying the production of videos like this, so why not give it another swing? Yes, the Muppets have been around for quite a while. The story of Jim Henson attempting to give the world a series with the medium of puppetry that can be both for kids and adults is something that I feel should be as well known as the origins of giants like Disney or DreamWorks themselves. While obviously not being as big as those two, they have been a huge driving force in not just puppetry, but media as a whole. Their series, The Muppet Show, has allowed for so much experimentation in the worlds of humor or having celebrity guest stars. Their movies hold a special place in terms of the ways they've had to evolve their style both during and after the Henson years. And even now, when I see current projects or even revisit old ones, the amount of appreciation I have for not just puppetry, but also practical effects as a whole makes me respect this type of filmmaking all the more. There really isn't much that I can argue with when it comes to a franchise like this. Whether you find yourself enjoying the old school Henson movies and specials, the more experimental TV series, or the current state of Muppet media, although a bit less consistent in terms of releases than before, there's no denying that this franchise and IP has made a place for itself in media over its more than 50-year history. Last time, we discussed the Muppets' first 4 dives into the silver screen, where we talked about the peaks and falls they took while making and producing their first 4 feature films. And this time around, we're gonna round out our marathon by discussing the movies left in their filmography. No specials or Disney Plus outings just yet. For this video, we'll be going over the movies that were put out exclusively for theaters, give or take 1 or 2. So without further ado, it's time to play the music and it's time to light the lights. It's time to go over another video of... The second half of the 90s have to be one of the roughest times in this franchise's history. Not only did a lot of their projects have a rocky start in terms of overall vision, but also The Muppets, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, and so many other projects lost who could arguably be the figurehead of all these operations, Jim Henson. This was their second feature film without the Idea Man around, and from what I could gather, spirits were low and stress was high for the team behind everyone's favorite felt comedians. Following the success of Muppet's Christmas Carol, the Henson studio decided to team up with Disney once again to bring the audience Muppet Treasure Island, a take on the book of the same name that followed the adventures of young Jim Hawkins finding the map towards Captain Flint's lost treasure, albeit done in their own signature Muppet way. Right off the bat, you could tell the feel and attempt at adapting a story like this would end up being far more different than A Christmas Carol in a few ways. For one, the movie strays far more comedic. Where Christmas Carol had the intention of being a serious performance, I mean as much as felt can be, here it's just trying to give people a good time. Being filled to the brim with all types of songs, visual gags, comedic timing, references to both the book and other IPs, pretty much anything you could find in a Muppet movie could be found here, but magnified tenfold. And 2, the way it's adapted. Where Christmas Carol had a ton taken beat for beat, word for word on the book it was based on, Treasure Island uses the book more as the bones of the feature, trying its best to spotlight both action and comedy rather than tone. Hence why there's more felt than human during the whole feature. The focus is meant to be on a few specific human characters, mainly being Jim, Long John Silver, and a few others. I mentioned the jokes, but there's also sword fights, a climax, betrayals, and more, and they all help give the movie a good balance of its 2 core strengths, making them both enjoyable. A good example of this fun side to the movie is a sword fight at the end. Look at the movements, the speed of everything. This is the type of excitement that makes movies like this worth rewatching, and it's presented really well here.
Silver!
That's not to downplay any of the human actors either. Kevin Bishop does a wonderful job in the role of Jim Hawkins. He rides that line of trying to be a wide-eyed innocent kid who's blind to the world he so desperately wants to explore, and a flawed character that isn't perfect all the time. In all honesty, he perfectly captures that coming-of-age character that so many adaptations of the story try to have.
You must be the cabin boys.
Yes, sir.
Which one of you is Hawkins?
I am, sir.
I knew your father, Jim. He was a good man.
Thank you, sir.
Alongside him is probably one of the best actors to play a character like Long John Silver, Tim Curry. The 90s pretty much belonged to this guy when he was around. Home Alone 2, Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost, It, you name it. And here's no exception. He brings a great mix of both threatening villainy and friendly banter to the role, with no real way of telling which one he'll be next. One minute he'll be consoling Jim at one of his lowest points. The next, he could be enjoying the victory with his crew by plundering and cheating our main characters out of their map. You could tell that no matter what he did, he enjoyed the role. And that's the best thing an actor could do.
I like you, boy. I hope you didn't think I was lying about that.
Come to think of it, there's a lot to give props for both this version of Long John Silver and the movie Treasure Planet's version. They're both somewhat related to the same studio, yes, but also both can be jokey but not overly so. Both can be an actual threat, but not without forgetting that humanity that's written for their arcs and their own features, but the book as well. It's a quality from both these films that I really have to tip my hat to. Another thing of note is that this would also be the last movie for a while to have Gonzo and Rizzo at the forefront. The duo themselves aren't annoying or anything, but I did find myself getting a little tired over finding them at the forefront of every movie I watched. It worked out well for Carol, but not so much here.
Oh, I wish we were back at the Admiral Bimbo eating table scraps.
We're about to become table scraps.
Oh, this is terrible. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
The music's also something to appreciate in this feature too. With assistance from Hans Zimmer, there's that grand epic scale in a lot of the musical numbers. From the crescendo of sounds that's sailing for adventure, to Tim Curry's well-done solo of A Professional Pirate, to the heartwarming ballad of Love Let Us Here. All of these help with setting the mood in the story, and to be honest, it wouldn't be the same movie without them. And the cherry on top of Treasure Island is what makes each of these movies, to me at least, special: the practical effects. This is something I mentioned a while back in my Team and Team Movies video, but pre the overuse of CG to repair shots from movies, there was a real amount of elbow grease used in features like this. Real blood, sweat, and tears were put into stuff like the fake Treasure Island or the Hispaniola, were reminders that no matter the result, a ton of effort went into making movies like this. When what's done is done, this falls in with the rest of the Muppet features quite nicely. It's not the most professionally crafted or skillfully acted piece of Muppet media, but for a swashbuckling, cannon-firing, treasure-finding adventure, you really can't go wrong here. The year is 1999. Pokemon was hitting its stride, everyone was living La Vida Loca, and the Muppets came out with a film boldly going where no Muppet has gone before: space. Or at least close to it. After years of this IP going through fairy tales and literature, I'll admit it was strangely refreshing seeing them back in regular areas like suburbia. Even during the production, the director Tim Hill's main goal was to bring back the feel of the first Muppets movie, both in terms of the heart and how this cast works together so well in settings apart from putting on a show, something we've been very accommodated with for the last few movies.
Well, what we wanted to do was sort of return to the first movie. The first movie were the Muppets as real people, real characters alive in America.
Honestly, this does feel like a premise that could only ever work with the whole ensemble on board. None of them are playing a part, none of them are leaving the rest of the group behind while they take center stage. It feels like good old-fashioned Muppet Mania, and to be frank, I missed it. To help with that feel as well is a soundtrack, which probably remains to this day the most distinct out of the bunch. As opposed to a collection of original songs sung by the cast, the movie has several pre-existing ones: She's a Brick House, Get Up Off That Thing, Shining Star. While something new and unexpected, they don't really take away from the movie, but add to it. Interestingly enough, I did find myself gelling well with the concept of From Space. The idea that Gonzo, despite everything he's done over the years, doesn't really know where he came from or what he is, does seem like a good arc for the guy. It allows for more and more insanity to flow as the movie goes on, once again contributing to the team's vision with a movie like this. Production-wise, this is the movie that reminded me of how far this franchise went in terms of merging practical and digital effects. Stuff like Gonzo flying through the air in the dream sequence and the opening sequence once again reminded me of the leaps and bounds a franchise like this takes when making a movie. The company's ramped up a lot too. Much like Treasure Island, the puns, physical stunts, and dialogue are heavy hitters. There's heart, don't get me wrong, but it's obvious that there was an attempt to at least go back to what the Muppets do best in their projects: make people laugh. The guest stars caught me off guard too, I'll admit. Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Rob Schneider, Ray Liotta. All of these were unexpected, and they added to the feel that this was more of a Muppet Show-like piece of media than most. They really wanted to show that these were the people they wanted to work with, and not checking off the box for some kind of product. What gets me about this as well is that despite this movie's existence, there's been this kind of unspoken rule about what it tried to do. And by that I mean future movies and shows would go back to the status quo of Gonzo calling himself a thing or a whatever, rather than the alien origin that this movie spent its entire runtime trying to establish.
An epic love story between a very handsome handsome, long-nosed purple thing.
It sucks too because out of this cast that I do love, I found myself liking Gonzo the most. I'll admit this wasn't what I expected on my first watch for this movie, but it did impress me. And it kinda sucks that something like this would end up being retconned because it wasn't a financial hit or whatever. Apart from that, I guess my only complaint about Muppets from Space is that the villain is kind of underwhelming. He does his thing and tries to act threatening enough, but I'm sorry, there's not much that's memorable or unique from him besides his assistant Muppet who acts as the comedic relief. We're a long ways away from the Jewel Thieves, Doc Hoppers, and Long John Silvers of the previous Muppet movies.
Don't laugh!
At the end of the day, much like Muppets Take Manhattan, this does feel like another black sheep in this franchise's movies. It's not perfect, but it attempted to bring a different style and feel in an era where not only were things unknown for the Muppets, but the franchise needed a shakeup when compared to the source material they took for movies and would continue to take after, like the next movie on our list.
Hi, I'm the Great Gonzo, and you're watching Disney Channel. Whoa. Yeah!
I'm Fuzzy Bear, and you're watching Disney Channel. Waka waka.
Capping off the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s era of Muppet movies, comes the Muppets' only movie in the quote-unquote new millennium, Muppets Wizard of Oz. Now, Oz parodies aren't anything new in media. Phineas and Ferb, Robot Chicken, Tom and Jerry, all of these attempted to do something like this before. Hell, this isn't even the first time that the Muppets tackled the Wizard of Oz in general.
So we're off to see the wizard!
Bro, that was so funny.
But I'll just come out and say it. This movie's weird. Not weird in a bad sense, but weird in a I can't really decide whether I like it or not. For one, casting for both the human and Muppet actors is pretty solid. Though a little bit unorthodox at first, Ashanti is a believable Dorothy, who brings a quote-unquote modern retelling of the character. I always kinda saw Dorothy as a voice of innocence when compared to the rest of the bombastic cast of Oz, and her portrayal here fits right in. The movie does try its best to hammer home how boring and drab her life in Kansas is. Her aunt disapproving of her pop star mentality, her uncle's willingness to try and keep both from infighting. Even the town has a lot less of a populated feeling when compared to other Muppet locations in other movies. And if that was their intention, then they did good here. The same can go for the rest of the Muppet cast for the most part. Kermit as a scarecrow, Fozzie as the Cowardly Lion, Gonzo as the Tin Man, and Miss Piggy as all three of the witches. It would make sense to have the main five all take roles here since that's how they've been done from the start, all of which fit their place as if they were parts of the original sketches. A lot of us forget that when it comes to movies like this, especially in this era where they had a ton of characters to work with, the endless amounts of Muppets at their disposal to use as actors was a challenge that most of the time hit their mark. From a joke perspective though, that's where I'm more split down the middle. Some are good, like Kermit's interaction with Quentin Tarantino, and the Oz for Dummies visual gag at the start, those work fine, but a lot of it just doesn't. The weird celebrity cameos, the awkward attempts at adult humor, they don't feel like the Muppets from before. It just felt off. I don't really know how to explain it.
I thought it'd be so hard to find an all-American girl with talent.
Yeah! How do the producers of Girls Gone Wild do it?
You what?
This might also be the movie in this franchise with the smallest amount of musical numbers. I Gotta Get Out Here, Calling All Munchkins, The Witches in the House, all of these help give the movie a sense of identity, trying to lean over into the more showbiz angle that it tries to give itself. And the only reason it's even of note is because they're also composed by Michael Giacchino. Yes, the Incredibles and Ratatouille composer. You know, the more I research these videos, the more facts I find like this, and the more it makes me interested in these, despite how bad or good they can be. Looking at it now, I can kind of see why people would skip this when picking a movie from this franchise to watch. Compared to the serious tones of Christmas Carol, the optimism of the first movie, or hell, even the more grand, epic scale of the music that comes from Muppets Take Manhattan, this one ends up being not so up to snuff. They tried, believe me, but a lot of it just point blank doesn't work here. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy a lot of what this movie does, like having the Wicked Witch of the West be in a full-on biker gang, the absolutely hilarious aftermath of the witch's first encounter with the group, and especially the angle of trying to be more showbiz-esque. All of these work in the movie's favor, but it's a bit of good mixed with a lot of bad in my opinion, and I can't really see it more than a 5 out of 10 movie. Every group of movies has at least one dud, and to me personally, this one's it. If you like it, it's fine, but I wouldn't really see it more than once a year. But as it's been told before, this would be the last time in a long time that the Muppets would be making movies. They snuck back into the darkness, working instead on other mediums, but the next movie we'll talk about is something you could say was a little unexpected.
You okay? That was quite a tumble.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Guys, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This one's the movie I've been waiting to cover for a while, cause there's so much history, so much significance, and just so much about it that needs to be talked about. First, the history. It had been a while since the Muppets Wizard of Oz, about 6 years to be exact, and while mostly not involved in the film scene, the Muppets and the Jim Henson Company were still chugging along, making new projects under the Disney banner, specials, unique charity events, appearances in the Disney parks. All was going well for them, all things considered. But what really brought back interest in the Muppets was what they did online, putting out multiple short-form and long-form pieces of content, with the most popular one that could arguably be one of the reasons for this movie existing was their cover of Bohemian Rhapsody. This, alongside the brains of Jason Segel, Nicholas Stoller, and James Bobin, who were all determined to make the Muppets return to cinema the best it could be. And judging by how the movie ended up, they more than knocked it out of the park for this one. After stumbling across the evil CEO Tex Richmond's plans to tear down the Muppet studio in order to drill for oil, it's up to Walter, Gary, and his girlfriend Mary to reunite the Muppets once again to put on a show and save the studio. Okay, so a plot summary like that would come off as very generic and not the most exciting in the world. But to me at least, it's not the plot that kept this movie on top for me. It's what they did with the movie in general. Let me explain. For starters, they let you know right off the bat that this is meant to go off of previous Muppet movies, not through hints or tiny details, but with references to them. The original standard Rich and Famous contract? Here. The Muppet Show actually existing in universe? Also here. An image that shows that the events of Muppets Take Manhattan actually happened, including the wedding at the end? Definitely here. And I adore the angle they took this way because it makes the movie ride the line of being a legacy sequel and a continuation all in one, where it acknowledges the past and chooses to do new things with that past in mind. It helps set the idea that the Muppets had a history and an impact in the world of the film. I especially love the way that they retrace the steps of their first feature in particular. We're all well aware of the events that occurred in that movie, how the gang all met and how they became the stars they are now. Here it's a final hurrah to save what they consider a valuable part of their legacy by bringing in their best strengths together again, which I feel works in the movie's favor more often than not.
Oh, great! But wait, how do we find them?
Didn't you see our first movie? We drive.
And something that shouldn't go unmentioned is the introduction, integration, and inclusion of one of their newest cast members, Walter. Someone who I feel makes this movie for a lot of people. He has the innocence, smarts, and delivery of any of the old protags from movies previous, with the added advantage of, surprise surprise, being a Muppet himself. He surprisingly brings a lot of the emotional core of the film as well. With him being obviously not human, he feels a lot more of a kinship being with his idols than most for this movie. He's a character that I feel doesn't get a lot of the credit he deserves when it comes to this franchise in general, seeing as how Disney and the Muppets just kinda dumped him after a few good years.
Oh, that's not good.
There's just a very sweet, warm, and hopeful feeling this movie tries to pull off here. It's not drab or grey, it's colorful and fun. From the musical numbers like Life's a Happy Song and Me Party, the feel in general when all the Muppets are together, even the so-called evil CEO, Tex Richmond, is on that Doc Hopper level of villainy, where he's not overly malicious and more of a Dick Dastardly type of villain. From its darkest moments to its lightest songs, they do them really well here. This might also be the first time in a long time where the cameos actually fit too. One of the most defining features since the first movie has always been the celebrities that show up in these movies, and here there's more than ever. What I do like about them is that, at least to me, they don't feel forced. Not all of them are organic, but they feel carefully chosen for a gag or dialogue. They didn't check off the boxes for which actor needed to be in the feature for audiences to flock to it. They wanted to work with the people they wanted to, and you can really see that here. And as much as these gags shouldn't work, They do. To add to this, the movie also looks great from a production standpoint. Look at these movements, look at these effects. Despite coming out in 2011, this was done mostly through practical effects, figuring out what goes where for the shot, and that's very admirable from my point of view. The best part? The main characters don't actually win. Well, not in a traditional sense. They don't end up reaching their goal despite their best efforts, but they ended off with what I consider a moment that represents the film in its entirety, the speech that Kermit gives.
Thanks to Walter here, we tried. And if we failed together, and to me, that's not failing at all.
Not only that, but they add onto it too, with a scene of fans rejoicing at the return of the cast. Millions of voices shouting their names in excitement. And it's this kind of hopeful messaging that gives the movie that more of an edge compared to the rest of what I covered today. Honest to God, there's not much I can really point out as a negative for this movie. It's lovingly made, it's smartly written, it showed all of its strengths throughout its hour-and-a-half long runtime. It's simply the Muppets at their best. And that's not even the last movie we're covering.
Aw, hell yeah, you already know what time it is. It's time for your yearly Manual D Collabs with GeekTunes segment, baby!
Holy sh**!
Muppets 2011 was an incredibly successful movie, not only with critics and audiences, but also within the box office. But I'm sure Geek has made that pretty clear up until now. My point is that the Muppets were officially back in the public's consciousness, which could very well mean a new era for the Muppets was upon us. At least that's what it seemed like at first. 3 years later, we would get the release of Muppets Most Wanted, the movie I was asked to talk about for this video. This movie is weird because while everybody and their mother will give its predecessor the flowers it rightfully deserves, Most Wanted's biggest impact was that unfunny evil Kermit meme that was popular back in the 2010s. Yeah, back then the reception towards this film was rather mixed, which honestly confuses me because while this movie isn't as great as Muppets 2011, it's genuinely a pretty great movie on its own. The film picks up directly where the first one ended, where the Muppets are ready to do a sequel, and in the middle of figuring out what they should do, the appropriately named Dominic Bad Guy suggests to be the Muppets manager during a world tour. However, at the same time, Constantine, the world's most dangerous frog, escapes from a prison, a criminal that looks exactly like Kermit. So during their first tour, Constantine does the old switcheroo with Kermit, which leads to Kermit going to a Siberian gulag, while Constantine and Dominic trick the Muppets to doing a world tour. So now it's up to our cheesy cast of characters to find out the truth, put a stop to Constantine, and save Kermit from impending doom. Just like the second Muppet movie, Most Wanted is a heist film that leads into its comedy aspect rather than the heart of the first movie, which doesn't mean that this movie lacks any lighthearted moments because it does have plenty of them, but that doesn't mean that it hits quite as hard. The humor is front and center, and for the most part, this film has a great mix of being absolutely chaotic with its visual gags and insanely clever with its dialogue. The story, while rather being cliche at times, acknowledges this and makes up for it by having our characters go through the most over-the-top situations I've seen the Muppets go through. From having Kermit perform an escape plan while managing a gulag talent show, from having Dominic Bad Guy steal a crown from England with a group of babies, this movie knows it's ridiculous and takes advantage of that full-heartedly. The cast is also as entertaining as ever. Walter from the first film makes a return, our usual cast of Muppets are still incredibly fun, Constantine makes for a great antagonist because of how well he balances being a threat, as well as being kind of goofy with how hard he tries to act like Kermit, and the celebrity cast as well do a great job. Ricky Gervais as Dominic, Ty Burrell as John Pierre, and Tina Fey as Nadia are some specific highlights for me. But that's not the only thing this movie does well. The soundtrack is filled with nothing but bangers, which to be honest is already kind of expected for a Muppet movie. The first song, We're Doing a Sequel, does a great job setting up the goofy tone you'll be seeing throughout the movie. I'm Number One sets up the dynamic between Dominic and Constantine, where the latter makes it abundantly clear that he's the one in charge and won't make you forget about it, while the former has dreams of becoming the one in charge, but for the meantime continues to be his number two. The Big House is a solo number sung by Nadia as she introduces the gulag to Kermit. She describes it as a luxury place, when it's pretty clear that it's a pretty shitty place to be in. I'll Get You What You Want consists of Constantine gaslighting Miss Piggy into thinking that he's Kermit, and he'll get her whatever she needs. This is by far the weakest song of the soundtrack. It's kind of a vibe, I guess, but it just isn't doing much for me. On the other hand, however, the interrogation song by John Pierre and Sam Eagle has been stuck in my head for more than a decade. It's nothing special, just the two police officers interrogating the Muppets, but the instrumentals and the back and forth deliveries between both parties are just mwah, chef's kiss. Something So Right is the emotional song of the film, where Miss Piggy is contemplating on whether marrying Kermit. or I guess in this case, Constantine. It's something that she's wanted for the longest time, but now that the moment's here, she can feel like there's something wrong. I also like that Celine Dion shows up throughout the song too. The movie has a gag where Piggy wants to perform covers of Celine Dion songs, so I'm glad that the joke paid off here. The final song, not counting the coal mine song because why would I analyze that, is Together Again. A nice, energetic song to wrap up the film, with everybody that we've seen from the film making a return, clamoring that they are, indeed, together again. Wait, is that Diddy? Overall, while I find Muppets 2011 to be the better film out of the two, Muppets Most Wanted is still a pretty great film. It's a really solid return to form that left me wanting more, but it's been a decade and the most recent thing Disney's doing with the IP is tearing its theme park ride. But hey, at least we're getting a re-themed roller coaster with that's gotta be a win, right? Alright, that's all I have to say. Back to you, Geek.
I feel something to take away from this video is that the Muppets are a franchise that no matter which way you slice it, they matter. Whether it be through series, specials, movies, or even other appearances, they've held the idea that what they did over the last 50+ years of entertainment made an impact. This idea, these characters, this name, they all mean something to so many people. They might not be as popular as they once were, as controversial as other actors or franchises, but they've proven time and time again that whatever they end up doing, they won't fail to play the music or light the lights, and put out the best show they possibly can.